All eyes are on Goa today, and no, it's not what you're thinking. There is no concert or beach party. Goa is hosting a major diplomatic meeting. The SCO foreign ministers are in town. SCO is the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. New Delhi is chairing the SCO this year, so all major summits will be held in India. This one is the foreign ministers' meeting. Most of the delegates have already arrived in Goa, but there is one around whom there's a lot of interest. Bilawal Bhutto Zardari. He is the foreign minister of Pakistan. Bhutto landed in Goa around evening. He was careful to depict this visit as multilateral and not bilateral. Listen to the statement before his departure. During my visit, which is focused exclusively on the SCO, I look forward to constructive discussions with my counterparts from friendly countries. India feels the same. Foreign Minister S. Jaishankar is holding bilateral meetings with most of his counterparts in Goa. He's already met the Russian and Chinese foreign ministers, but a meeting with Bhutto is unlikely, at least a formal one. Jaishankar said last month that talks and terror cannot go hand in hand. It was a clear message of India's intent. Nonetheless, you can understand the symbolism around it. The last time a Pakistani foreign minister visited India was in 2011. It's been more than a decade. So Bhutto's visit has stirred some excitement. The Goa summit is a two-day event. Today was all about settling in. Minister Jaishankar also hosted a dinner for the foreign ministers. But tomorrow is business day, which brings us to the most important question. What is on the agenda? India's SCO presidency theme is secure. S for security, E for economic development, C for connectivity, U for unity, R for respecting sovereignty, and E for environmental protection. SECURE. Pretty much covers everything. But what are the key issues and deliverables? Reports say 15 proposals will be cleared by the foreign ministers. These will be forwarded to July for the main summit. That's when the heads of state, SCO heads of state and government will gather in India again. I'll list out some of the important issues. One is a national payment system, a mechanism to trade in local currencies within the SCO. It's a very ambitious project. Reports say talks are only in the initial stages. Another issue is of the expansion of the SCO. Belarus and Iran's membership will be discussed by the foreign ministers. So will observer status for Kuwait, the UAE, Myanmar and the Maldives. Speaking of Myanmar, some interesting developments there. The Chinese foreign minister made a stop in Myanmar before reaching Goa. He also met the leader of the military junta. Why is this important? Because China has always eyed influence in Myanmar. It has provided weapons for the junta, invested billions in the country's infrastructure, not to mention offered legitimacy for the regime. No other country has recognized the military rulers of Myanmar. So a meeting with the Chinese foreign minister is a big deal. But what do they get in return? A direct access to the Indian Ocean and the Bay of Bengal. And it's a strategic concern for India, one that extends to the SCO. You see, most countries in this organization are Chinese allies. Beijing sees the SCO as a tool to undermine the West, just like it sees the BRICS. And that leaves India in a pickle. New Delhi does not want to be stuck in a Chinese boys' club. At the same time, it doesn't want to lose out on opportunities presented by the SCO. This is a group that makes up around 30% of the world's GDP, 17.5% of global trade, and 42% of the global population. Plus, it could be India's window to Central Asia. So the challenge is to strike a balance, to use the SCO where it suits New Delhi. Hence the secure agenda. India has tried to push the SCO beyond just security and strategy. There is now focus on economic and cultural cooperation. And that balancing act will be challenged tomorrow. The discussions will inevitably cover Ukraine and Western sanctions. Those will be the tricky issues to navigate. We'll be tracking this summit closely. Now for our next story, let's make a list. How many things do you pay for on a daily or monthly basis? And I'm not talking about food or water, I'm talking about services. Chances are you pay for ad-free music or ad-free streaming or OTT services like Netflix or Amazon. It's a no-brainer for most of us. We like the service, so we pay. Why not do the same for news? Most people read news online nowadays. Around 72% Indians get their updates from smartphones. 86% in America and again 72% in Europe. Almost all of that news is free. All you have to do is go on Google or YouTube or Twitter. Just think of this show that you're watching right now. Chances are you're seeing it on YouTube. Did you have to pay for it? No. And some governments are now trying to change this. Canada is the latest. They're close to implementing a new online news policy. This policy will force internet companies to pay publishers. How does that work? Assume you run a news website. Until now, your articles were free of cost online. You could find them on Google. You could read them on Google. But under this new law, Google would have to pay you, the publisher I mean, let's say $100. If Google pays, they will be allowed to display links to your website. If not, those links can be taken down. Your website would become invisible on Google. So here's what Canada is trying to do. It wants internet companies to strike commercial deals with publishers. Pay them to keep their content online. Just one problem though. The internet companies are pushing back. Google and Meta are threatening to limit services in Canada. They say they will simply stop offering news. And that's trouble on two counts. One, it will hurt the publishers and journalists. And two, news should never be limited. It's a key part of any thriving democracy. So what's the solution here? Luckily, we have seen this situation before. It happened in Australia back in 2021. Their government passed a similar bill asking big tech to pay for news. Both Google and Meta pushed back. Facebook even banned news services for some time, but eventually both companies came around. They've signed 30 commercial deals with news publishers since then, and the Australian government has called it a success. So there is still hope for Canada. But what about the broader picture? If Australia and Canada can do it, why not other countries? And it's a valid question. At the heart of this puzzle is the revenue model. And don't run away, I promise to keep it simple. Most news publishers need ad revenue to survive. But for ads, you need traffic. And for traffic, you need more people to visit your website or see your videos. Enter Google and Meta. These companies link you to news websites. For example, go to Google and search for the coronation. Google will show you a list of all the articles. Without Google, you would have never found them. These links can actually be counted. Google linked people to Canadian publishers 3.6 billion times in the last year. Facebook, 1.9 billion times. This led to free marketing worth around $230 million. Facebook says that money should be enough. They're providing traffic, so why should they pay more? I'll tell you why. Because despite all the so-called free marketing, it's still a raw deal for news websites. I agree it's a give-and-take relationship, but big tech is taking a lot more than it's giving. Some social media companies are trying to change this. Twitter, for one. Elon Musk has announced that users will have to pay for news. Like pay per view, it will be pay per click. News companies can charge per article. It's an idea whose time has come, we say. Google and Meta benefit from people's interest in news. When Russia attacks Ukraine, or when King Charles gets his crown, where do people go? They go to the internet to read about it. We as journalists supply people with the information they want. It is for our content that people are Googling. So it's only fair that the revenue be shared. Now imagine a child, barely 10 years old, sweeping the floor at a restaurant, toiling away in the dead of night. What image comes to your mind? Or rather, where do you picture this happening? In the United States of America? Because that's where this report comes from. Two 10-year-olds were found working in a McDonald's franchise. 10-year-olds were found cleaning the store, operating cash registers and serving food, sometimes as late as 2 a.m. It's the latest child labor abuse scandal coming out of America. A few days back, we told you how American states are loosening child labor laws. They're making it easier for companies to employ children and pay them less. And incidents like this are the reason why. US companies are increasingly violating child labor laws, and state governments are making it easier for them to do so. They're trying to protect companies from child labor fines. This story about the 10-year-olds comes from the state of Kentucky. A McDonald's franchisee there was found violating a host of child labor laws, and they weren't the only ones. More than 300 children were being exploited by just 3 firms here. All of them were McDonald's franchisees. They let minors operate machinery prohibited for children. They had them work beyond permissible hours, sometimes even during school hours. This violates all American federal laws about employing children. The laws clearly state that work must be permitted outside of school hours. Work must be performed, rather, outside of school hours, and children cannot work more than 3 hours on a school day. They cannot work more than 18 hours in total during a school week. The US Labor Department came out with a statement. A local official said, and I'm quoting, "Too often employers fail to follow the child labor laws that protect young workers. Under no circumstances should there ever be a 10-year-old child working in a fast food kitchen around hot grills, ovens, and deep fryers." And what are the consequences for such employers? Well, fines usually. In this case, the fine was hefty. The 3 McDonald's franchisees have to pay over $212,000. The firm employing the 10-year-olds will pay about $40,000. If they pay, that is. Because the franchisee is refuting the charges. It says the 10-year-olds were the children of a night manager, and that their parent brought them to work without informing the management, which does not really explain all the other child labor violations, more than 300, or the fact that these children were allowed to operate dangerous equipment. The Department of Labor official has said further, and I quote, "We are seeing an increase in federal child labor violations, including allowing minors to operate equipment or handle types of work that endangers them or employs them for more hours or later in the day than federal law allows." Let me show you some numbers. In 2022, the number of children working hazardous jobs went up by 26%. Illegal instances of employing minors was up by 37%. Penalties over child labor went up by 29%. So basically, child labor violations are on the rise in America. Companies are exploiting children. What's their excuse? Labor shortage. US companies cannot find enough cheap labor, so they're going after children. It's the same story across states and industries, and firms continue to break the law. The worst part is that some states are making it easier for companies to get away with all of this. And let me repeat, all of this is happening in the US. And it's not like child labor is unique to America. It's most likely worse in many other countries. But for a country that loves to lecture others on human rights and child rights and all kinds of rights, America is living in a glass house. Email exchanges from inside the BBC, they talk about the risk of violating Indian laws. It's easier to rake up the freedom of speech debate, but does it give anyone a free pass to knowingly violate the law? America supports India because it needs India's support in return. And India is working with the US because it suits India's interests. This is how geopolitics works. Last night, he diffused a crisis with his defense minister. But today, Netanyahu was confronted with a new problem. His cabinet seems to have rebelled against him. The UK is looking at the Indian subcontinent to fill its coffers. That India seems to be negotiating from a position of power, like a partner and not a former colony. The US and Russia are dangerously close to an armed conflict. This year, 2023, New Delhi will be the capital of global diplomacy. For a country as diverse as ours, with 88% of the population illiterate, it was a very big deal to write a constitution, and that too, the world's largest. Meanwhile, if we may, here's a Republic Day gift from India for the BBC. A list of suggestions for the BBC for their upcoming documentaries. Number 1, the Kohinoor and the colonial loot. Number 2, an outdated monarchy and unhealthy obsession with the royals. Number 3, racism in 2023. We're waiting.